Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first in a series of autumn webinars that Ridouts is holding. Just a few housekeeping points. Hopefully you can all see and hear me okay. Make sure your volumes are up on your computer settings, that you have a good mobile and Wi-Fi signal, and if it's still all going horribly wrong, then perhaps the classic IT suggestion of switching it off and switching it back on again might actually work. There will be an opportunity to ask questions. We're going to take questions at the end of the session, and you will see a panel at the bottom of your screen where you can pop your questions in, and we will try and get through as many of those as possible. The webinar is being recorded, and we will be sending out all the slides and the recording to all participants after the event. Now, if you are using social media and want to tweet or put things on LinkedIn during the course of the webinar, then feel free to do so. We would ask that you use the hashtag RidoutsWebinars2020. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Caroline Barker and I'm the COO of Ridouts. And this morning I'm joined by colleagues Gemma Nicholas and Laura Paton, who are going to talk to you about the future of CQC inspections, how they might impact on providers, and what to do when an inspector calls, and what if the results of the inspection aren't quite as you would hope they might be. The world, and particularly the health and social care sector, has been in a state of flux for the last 6 months, and it looks like it's going to be for some time to come. So thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy days to join us. The webinar actually comes at quite a fortuitous point, with CQC just about to roll out its transitional regulatory approach, coming in next Tuesday, so in a week's time, moving away from timetabled inspections and towards more risk-based targeted inspections. Now, that automatically raises a whole number of questions and concerns, or potential concerns, for the sector. The CQC have said that the programme will be flexible. Question, will they actually be able to be consistent across different regions and different inspectors, which we know is a massive issue for the sector already. CQC have said they will target based on risk, so they will not be going in looking for good, as at least theoretically they ought to be, actual comprehensive inspections. So will they actually be making a beeline for evidence that supports their already preconceived ideas? And where site visits are needed, CQC have said that they're going to be short and sweet. So question, are providers actually going to be able to showcase adequately the entirety of their service? All these points will feed into your inspection report and your ratings. It also raises a number of issues around those providers who have been working hard to make improvements to their ratings, those who have been trying to get from requires improvement to good or good to outstanding. And because CQC are moving away from the timetabled inspections, will those providers actually be able to get the rating that they deserve? So the first speaker this morning is Gemma Nicholas. She is one of our solicitors, and Gemma joined us last year from CQC Legal. So she actually has quite a unique perspective on how CQC thinks and how they behave. So I'll hand straight over to Gemma. Thank you.
Thanks again for joining us. I'm going to steal the CQC's Chief Executive's recent phrase, now, next and future, to discuss. Next slide, please. Thank you. So sorry, again, I'm going to steal the CQC's Chief Executive's recent phrase, now, next and future, to discuss what CQC's immediate priorities are, what they have in store for the next few months, and what inspections will look like in the future. Next slide, please. So in terms of CQC's immediate priorities, I'm going to cover the emergency support framework, infection prevention and control inspections, and provider collaboration reviews. Looking at the next few months, I'm going to discuss the transitional regulatory approach, intelligence-led inspections and inspection triggers. And then in relation to the future of inspections, I'm going to look at CQC Strategy for 2021, covering the strategy themes and CQC's increased use of intelligence. Next slide, please. So first, looking at CQC's immediate priorities. On the 16th of March, due to the coronavirus outbreak, the CQC announced that it was suspending inspections. Many felt that the CQC was missing in action because it took them 2 months to regain visibility with its emergency support framework. However, since then, the CQC has not stopped reiterating that they have never stopped regulating. CQC's position was that the emergency support framework is a flexible and supportive process. The ESF was branded as a framework for the CQC to have honest conversations with providers. And I think we saw for the first time in a while the CQC providing support and advice to providers, usually through signposting. The ESF involved the CQC gathering information on safe care and treatment, staffing arrangements, protection and abuse, assurance processes, monitoring and risk management. And the CQC would inspect services that were deemed to be high risk, hence taking a risk-based approach to regulation. Also, the CQC did use their enforcement powers during this period where they found non-compliance, and for that reason, the Ridouts continued to warn providers to keep their wits about them during ESF conversations. The intelligence that fed into ESF conversations and the risk level that was assigned to service providers included user feedback, whistleblowing, serious incidents, and safeguarding concerns. In fact, 50% of CQC's physical inspections during COVID-19 were informed by whistleblowers. And this statistic highlights the need for providers to have robust whistleblowing procedures in place so that staff take their concerns to their employer rather than straight to the CQC. Next slide, please. Moving on to infection prevention and control inspections. During August, the CQC carried out a programme of inspections of infection prevention and control in 300 care homes that were selected as potential examples of good practice. Their findings were that very few providers were not doing well in infection prevention and control. They found 90% assurance across the 300 inspections, and this was based on a simple rating system of the CQC either being assured, somewhat assured, or not assured. Two areas where they had the greatest assurance were safe admission and infection prevention and control for visitors. Two areas where they had the least assurance were providers' infection prevention and control policies and risk assessments and the effective use of PPE. Ridouts were concerned that these infection prevention and control or good practice inspections could be switched into a routine regulatory inspection at any point, plus that there was a lack of opportunity to make factual accuracy representations. The CQC did take action in a few homes using requirement notices, warning notices, and in some cases placing conditions on a provider's registration. It appears to have been a recent decision by the CQC to extend the period of these types of inspections. The CQC will now be carrying out a further 500 infection prevention and control inspections between early October and late November. And in light of this, it is important for providers to learn from the first set of inspections. Providers should study the CQC's infection prevention and control methodology, questions and prompts available on the CQC's website. Review and keep up to date your infection prevention and control policies and risk assessments, and revisit Public Health England's guidance and ensure that staff are using the appropriate PPE as well as wearing it properly. Next slide, please. So touching upon provider collaboration reviews. Provider collaboration reviews are a series of rapid reviews to identify themes and learning from COVID-19. They are intended to help providers and local health and care leaders. The first phase, which was between June and August, looked at care to the over 65s and their journey across the health and social care system. Key themes that came out of the first phase were how person-centred care was maintained as service users moved through the system leadership in relation to governance arrangements during COVID, workforce capacity and capability, and digital solutions and technology. More details of the first phase will feature in the CQC's State of Care report due to be published in October. The second phase will begin in October, and it's looking at urgent and emergency care and will include the CQC interviewing adult social care providers. In essence, provider collaboration reviews illustrate the increasing focus on innovation and collaboration. Next slide, please. And now let's consider what the CQC has planned for the next few months. The transitional regulatory approach is a new regulatory model that will be launched on the 6th of October. It involves the CQC building on the emergency support framework. As part of the new approach, the CQC will be focusing on areas where they think quality needs to improve, which are safety, people's access to services, and leadership. Next slide, please. Over the next few months, the CQC will be conducting intelligence-led inspections, whereby they will monitor and review information from all available sources, such as information gathered by experts by experience, from people who use services, such as through their Give Feedback on Care campaign, and also the Because We All Care campaign, from provider collaboration reviews, and information gathered through routine ongoing monitoring. As has always been the case, it is not just about the collection of lots of data. What's important and what we are concerned about is how the data is verified before it is used to impact CQC's assessment of risk. Next slide, please. There will be a slight change to inspection triggers. CQC's focus will continue to be on services that present the most risk. According to the CQC, they will decide whether to inspect based on a review of the monitoring information and using a streamlined set of queries. If the service is deemed to be low risk, the CQC will take no further action and will let providers know the outcome. They have said that the aim is that over time, in such situations, the CQC would publish a short statement on the services page on their website and let people know their decision. If the service is deemed to be high risk, the CQC will inspect using its existing inspection methodologies and will look at any or all of the queries, but may not cover all aspects of the 5 key questions or queries. So for that reason, the inspection may not result in a re-rating. Their message around re-rating has not been consistent, so it's an area to pay close attention to. Before issuing its joint statement on the transitional regulatory approach, the CQC's message was that under the new approach, when inspecting, they would focus on improvement as well as risk, and that therefore there would be an opportunity to re-rate services. However, that message seems to have got lost in the joint statement which was published on the 16th of September. So key points to note in relation to what to expect of inspections in the next few months. As I said, the transitional regulatory approach will begin on the 6th of October. The CQC will be moving away from timetabled inspections to a risk-driven approach to inspections, but they will need to consult on this. They want to minimise on-site activity, so we'll be monitoring risk through a digital platform called the Transitional Monitoring App. CQC will be running a pilot with approximately 60 home care services, testing remote monitoring and focusing on safe and well-led. It will be interesting to see if CQC's supportive role continues, especially in light of the government's recent request that the CQC take strong action where improvement is required. And finally, the CQC has indicated that the transitional regulatory approach will be under constant review and tweaking between October and summer next year, so things can change. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. What does the future have in store? The CQC will consult on its new strategy in January 2020 and will launch its new strategy in May 2021. Sorry, I said that wrong. The CQC will consult on its new strategy in January 2021 and will launch the new strategy in May 2021. The strategy themes are smarter regulation, meeting people's needs, systems, safe care, and driving improvement. I will go through each of those in turn. So smarter regulation is about the CQC adapting their regulatory approach to account for providers' increased use of innovation. Also, they want to be able to update ratings more frequently so that they are providing an up-to-date view on quality and not simply using inspections to update ratings, especially when providers are generating improvements in their service. Meeting people's needs is the CQC focusing on those vulnerable groups that are likely to receive poor care. Also, it covers the focus on service users' journey through the health and social care system. Systems relates to how providers engage with local communities and how providers work together and collaborate. Safe care relates to the CQC wanting to learn more about behaviours, systems, leadership and culture, and they plan to act on blame culture within services. And driving improvement, which is the last theme, is probably the most interesting theme as it is still under development. The CQC is looking to raise the bar of what they expect of good services. They are exploring having closer relationships with providers, one of trust and support, but they are battling with the tension between their supportive role and their role as a regulator. They are also thinking of having a separate improvement arm of the CQC. So it's worth noting here as well that the CQC want feedback from the sector on what this theme should include. So moving on to increased use of intelligence. And the CQC's plans for this include providers having digital engagement with the NCSC, which is the CQC's contact centre. They also plan to use artificial intelligence in their risk and intelligence services. They plan to introduce mobile apps for regulatory activities supporting inspection and enforcement, and a new digital platform for all provider engagement. It's all well and good, the CQC launching new intelligent platforms and programmes which have the benefit of assessing risk in real time, but providers will be interested in whether through all of this, the CQC is actually becoming more intelligent. The CQC will need to apply common sense and act proportionately, which is often where the problem lies. It will be ever more important for providers to have in place robust governance arrangements to ensure that they are collecting their own evidence of the quality of care provided. This will arm providers for any battle with the CQC. In recent articles, the CQC's chief executive has hinted as to what the future holds. He has mentioned inspections being less of an event, there being less inspection pre-work and shorter inspection reports, which to me spells less transparency about what information is being monitored and when, the feeling and likely the reality of providers being constantly watched, and reports which provide even less information than they currently do on how the CQC has come to a decision or judgment. Next slide, please. So in summary, the ESF is coming to an end this month. So too is CQC's supportive role, perhaps. The ESF will be replaced by the CQC's transitional regulatory approach being launched next month, which will see the CQC continuing to inspect based on risk and will be using not only its existing inspection methodology, but will also look at any or all of the CLOEs and may review all or some aspects of the 5 key questions. And in all of this, we'll be focusing on safety, access and leadership. And then the future of CQC inspections appears to be less on-site activity, more use of intelligence and shorter inspection reports. As always, Ridouts will be keeping a close eye on how all of this plays out in practice, as well as ensuring that providers' voices are heard should the CQC get things wrong. That's all from me. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Gemma. Really interesting. I'm going to hand straight over to Laura Paton now. She's a Senior Associate with Ridouts, and Laura has extensive experience of advising providers both at the inspection stage and beyond, where CQC are perhaps taking some sort of enforcement action. So I'll hand straight over to you, Laura. Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline. I think I've unmuted, so hopefully everyone can hear me. Seeing some nods there, so that's good. It's always the first step on a Zoom call for everyone. So yeah, I am going to speak to you about how to get the most out of an inspection and what to do if you get an inspection report that you're not happy with, which I think is definitely something topical for various reasons. All of the information that's coming out of CQC about new inspections, but also the transitional regulatory approach coming into force, making it clear that certainly in this second wave of coronavirus, CQC will not be pausing inspections and they will be crossing the threshold of services. So I guess the first thing to look at is obviously pre-inspection, and providers often ask what they can do to ensure they receive the best rating out of a CQC inspection. And I would say to that, and I always say this, that preparation absolutely is key. Some of this is not a secret. You know, you should be aware, and I'm sure you are, that CQC's own guidance on its website publishes the ratings characteristics in each of the different categories: outstanding, good, requires improvement, etc. And underneath all of that gives you essentially a blueprint of what they say that good or outstanding looks like. And I appreciate that these are subjective, but a good starting point for any inspection preparation is to audit your own systems and processes against those ratings characteristics, and really make sure that when CQC come to inspect, you've got the best evidence available to show how you meet them. Something else that's really important to look at, and this is relatively new, is the infection prevention and control guidance and prompts. Now, these are all on CQC's website. If you've not already looked at them, I would recommend strongly that you do look at them. A bit like the published ratings characteristics, if you go into each category of them, each different prompt underneath it has a section that actually says what good looks like, and that's CQC setting out for you their expectation of what would amount to good. So if you can join that up with your internal documents and processes and really evidence that that's the standard that you are meeting. I'll say it just now, but infection prevention and control, if you're not already aware, is really hot on CQC's agenda. You'll be aware that the Department of Health produced their winter plan for adult social care last week or the week before. In that document, there's repeated reference to the fact that CQC will take additional enforcement action if they consider that infection prevention control is not up to standard, and that's both at service level and at provider level. So it really is very, very important that providers make sure that they are preparing properly in terms of infection prevention and control. Another document which I think is really useful for you to look at, and again it's something that's publicly available on CQC's website, is a new document that came out a couple of months ago, and it's called How to Get the Most Out of a CQC Inspection. It's publicly available on their website. It's not something that they keep secret, and I would really recommend that providers have a look at that. It's called How to Get the Most Out of an Inspection, What a Good Inspection Looks and Feels Like. Can I have the next slide, please? This document is really, really useful because it finally sets out in writing, publicly available, what you as a provider can expect from CQC and what CQC can expect from you. Over the years doing factual accuracy challenges, we often will include things like, inspectors didn't look at certain things, or they did certain things and they didn't do certain things, but it was all based on sort of general principles of fairness. Whereas now there is actually a document publicly available, a guidance document, you would almost say, that CQC is required to follow. Now, I'm not going to go through it in any detail because it's quite long. I've just picked out a couple of key points that I think are useful for preparation. The first one is from a provider perspective, and it states that you should reassure and empower care workers and other staff so that they know what to expect and are encouraged to speak openly with the inspection team. This is something I talk about all the time when I talk about preparing for inspections, and it's such a cliche, and I apologise for this, but you should think about inspections not as something that's done to you, but as a collaborative process. And the absolute best thing that you can do is make your staff confident in being able to speak to CQC and letting them know what to expect. I have been on CQC inspections, both registration and otherwise. They are quite a nerve-wracking experience, even for someone that's experienced with dealing with the CQC day in, day out. But you can guarantee that they'll come into a service and they'll speak to the member of staff, or they'll speak to the service user, the resident that you probably least want them to speak to. But certainly from a staff perspective, if everyone is prepared, you can at least be confident that you've done the best you can, that your staff will paint a good picture of all the good work that you're doing. I know that one provider who had some difficulty, and we helped them get up to good out of a situation where they were actually in an inadequate inspection, is that they shared this report with staff to say to them, does this feel like the service that you work in? Does this reflect the service that you provide? And staff were really unhappy with that, and they really wanted the opportunity to put the picture right with CQC when they came back in. So that's a good tip. And just getting ready to use every opportunity you have to showcase best practice. Don't wait for CQC to ask for things. Use the opportunity when they arrive. Use your PIR, any opportunity you can to show them what you're doing that's best practice and that meets those ratings characteristics that we spoke about at the start, will stand you in good stead for your inspection preparation. Can I have the next slide, please? And this is for CQC, and it's a thorny topic, always, always, always. When should we get feedback from CQC? Their guidance is that they should give it at the end of the inspection, but it's something that comes up time and time again when I'm challenging inspection reports, is things that you might perceive to be quite a serious risk that providers, the first time they hear about it is when it's in the draft report. Now, providers quite rightly say, well, if that had been such a big issue, why didn't CQC raise it on the day and I could have put it right? This new guidance document says that feedback should be given throughout the day and any immediate risks should be explained straight away. And the next point I've pulled out for CQC is about asking questions that should be asked in a clear way and explained or rephrased if not understood. We do sometimes see situations where members of care staff have been asked perhaps quite complex questions about dolls or MCA, things like that, that are maybe not phrased in a way that would immediately flag to them that they're talking about safeguarding, and they may know exactly what to do in a safeguarding situation, but it's not being phrased in a way that they understand, and that can put providers at a disadvantage. CQC should be alive to this, and they should be asking questions in a way that are clear and explained if they're not understood. Can I have the next slide, please? And just some practical tips, and again, these might sound obvious, but it's easy to forget under the pressure of an inspection, and especially right now when there's so many other things to consider in the current coronavirus climate. But you should take good notes. It can be quite a long time before you get a draft report, and as Gemma has mentioned in her presentation, draft reports are perhaps going to start looking a lot shorter with a lot less detail. So if you have a good record of what was discussed on the day, especially any concerns, which staff were spoken to, what questions were asked, it will be much easier if you get a report that you're not happy with to be able to go back and respond to that. In line with what I've mentioned in the last slide for CQC raising immediate concerns, you as a provider should make sure you address them and provide that evidence to CQC. I'll come on to this a little bit later, but there is a very short window where I think that if you address immediate concerns, you can still have that reflected in your draft report and hopefully the rating. So if there is anything that's flagged up, make sure you address it and provide evidence of that to the inspector. And the next point sort of follows on from that. If there's any follow-up information required that CQC have asked for, or things that they've asked to amend, please do supply that as soon as you possibly can after the inspection. Have the next slide, please. Post-inspection, CQC, as you will be aware, introduced a process not that long ago where registered managers now get a call from CQC regarding the draft report to talk about factual accuracies and any issues that they have. This has been a real interesting development at CQC, and we've had mixed experience of this. We have advised clients and providers to really treat this with caution. You're not obliged to take up this call. You can simply say that you want to follow up with your factual accuracy comments in writing if you have the draft report. Equally, some providers are concerned about not appearing cooperative if they don't take up the call. And if you take it up, at least you know you have the opportunity to raise issues with CQC. What I would say, and we have seen this happen actually on more than 2 occasions, is that if you provide what you consider to be factual accuracy comments to CQC over the phone, don't assume that CQC will automatically amend the report as a result. I know of at least 2 cases where providers have thought that they have given factual accuracy comments that would lead to the report being amended, but then the final report was published, nothing was changed, and by that time the window to provide factual accuracy comments had passed. Can I have the next slide, please? And this is moving on to nicely actually to the substantive, well, the next substantive part of my talk, which is challenging draft reports and what to do if you get a report that you're not happy with. You obviously get 10 days to do your factual accuracy comments. A lot of people are nervous about challenging the inspection reports and ask, well, why would you? The obvious reasons are factual inaccuracies and ratings, that's the key one. Your reputation, Commissioner considerations. There are some commissioners that won't commission a service that drops below good or requires improvement. The narrative of your service with CQC, if there is going to be a longer time in between inspections, and if you don't put your position on record with CQC, then they'll just take the last report as read, as fact, and if you don't set out your position with them, then that will be your narrative with CQC. There's also their approach to services that have repeated ratings of requires improvement. If you get a rating of requires improvement after 2 inspections, CQC can decide that that is something that they want to look at under well-led and Regulation 17. They could potentially say that's a breach of Regulation 17. And as you may be aware, any breach of a regulation in a draft report is an overall rating limiter for requires improvement for the whole inspection. Can I have the next slide, please? So as I've mentioned, there are a couple of routes to challenge. I'm only going to talk about factual accuracy comments today just because of the time. The other remedies I would say are predominantly judicial remedies, which of course as a firm of solicitors we can assist you with, but they're sort of out with the scope of today's talk. But broadly speaking, you've got your factual accuracy comments, independent review, ratings reviews, and judicial reviews with or without an injunction and complaints. Can I have the next slide, please? So in terms of factual accuracy comments, you get 10 working days to respond. CQC used to get this wrong quite often, and it's 10 days from the date that you get the draft report. So check that email, make sure CQC have got the deadline right. I haven't put it on the slides because it's publicly available on CQC's website, but their guidance is online about what you can challenge and the types of evidence that you should submit and how you should follow the process. That is using the form, also making sure you submit evidence. And if you do submit evidence, you have to cross-reference it. Key points that I would bring out in relation to your factual accuracy comments is that it's a long dispelled myth that you can only challenge pure factual inaccuracies. Their guidance is clear that you can challenge breaches and ratings judgments. And to do that, I would remind you about the published characteristics, and I would urge you to cross-reference them in your factual accuracy comments. In addition to CQC's publicly available guidance, we've also got a document via Freedom of Information, which is, you probably can't see it on the camera, but it's factual accuracy check internal guidance for inspectors, and it's got top tips about what CQC should do, what they shouldn't do. And that document is clear that factual accuracy comments can lead to a change in ratings. It's also very clear that inspectors shouldn't tell providers through the factual accuracy response simply to submit a rating review. And we do still see that from time to time, and that's not correct. Can I have the next slide, please? Can I just have the next slide, please, Chloe? I'm not sure about everyone else's slides, but mine don't seem to be moving on. Luckily, I have got a paper copy here. So then we move on to CQC's responses to your factual accuracy challenge. And again, this factual accuracy check internal guidance document, which I'm happy to share if providers would like me to share that with them, just get in touch. Chloe, if I could just have the next slide, please, thanks. It explains how CQC should respond to your complaints. Now, CQC's response to your factual accuracy challenge should be reviewed by someone independent. Oh, that's great. Sorry, I'm just getting a message here. We've got the next slide. Yeah. It should be reviewed by someone independent from the original site visit. Now, I won't go into the detail of this, but the reason for this is that there was a quite high profile judicial review case that went to the High Court, which was quite scathing of CQC's approach to factual accuracy responses. Basically, they gave CQC into trouble for marking their own homework. And so if you get your factual accuracy comments, they're reviewed, they come back, and it's been done by the same inspector, the same inspection manager, then I think you have grounds for challenge there to ask for an independent review and also to request a ratings review. Can I have the next slide, please? If that's possible. They do seem to be jumping about a bit. Apologies. I've just got one more slide, and if people are not able to see them properly, we can send them out afterwards. But what I was going to talk about very quickly is just further challenges. You think it's not being considered by someone that's independent of the inspection, or or if you think that CQC have supplied evidence, or you've supplied evidence and CQC have not taken it into account, or any other reason that you don't think that your response has been treated fairly, then there can be grounds to request an independent review of your factual accuracy comments. And we have used this quite successfully and still are doing in more recent times. It is something that you have to do fairly quickly. And so I would take advice on this as soon as you can. But basically, you can set out the grounds why you don't consider your factual accuracy comments have been considered fairly, and ask for them to be reviewed by someone independent of the inspection team. And you can also ask that the report is withdrawn or not published, depending on whether it's been published or not, as part of that process. The final area is just a flag, because I'm aware that I'm now going over time slightly, is you can ask for a rating review. Now, rating reviews are, I mean, I don't know how to put this, they're not really worth the paper they're written on. All you can review is CQC's process in aggregating ratings. You can't challenge their judgments usually through the rating review process, which makes it quite difficult, and underlines why the factual accuracy process is the key area to have your ratings changed if that's what you're looking for, and regulatory breaches removed. The final thing I would say in relation to a ratings review, however, is in light of that internal factual accuracy top tips guidance, there are certain things like, for example, if a manager doesn't sign off your response to the factual accuracy comments, or they're not looked at independently, that could give you a hook for a rating review, as that's an error in CQC's process. But each of them turns on their own facts, but there are some grounds, but very limited grounds. After that, you are looking at judicial review, which is of course a court procedure, and it's expensive and it comes with risk of costs. And the final thing to cover off is that you can of course complain about CQC's conduct. And actually, I think that document I talked about at the very beginning with the expectations for what an inspection would look like could inform your complaint. What I would say is that complaints are unlikely, almost never change your ratings. They might in some circumstances lead to a re-inspection. They might lead to a change in your inspection team for next time, but they really are sort of focused on conduct. And be aware that if you raise factual accuracy comments through a complaint, CQC will just direct you back to the factual accuracy process. Now, sorry, I'm aware I've gone slightly over time, so I'm going to end it there. And apologies if the slides were jumping about slightly, but we can send them to you and hopefully it will make a bit of sense with the recording. And if you want to get in touch, I can send that FOI document as well. I'll hand you back to Caroline, who's going to run our... Thanks.
Thank you, Laura. Hopefully people, can you hear me, Laura?
I can, yes.
Great. Sorry, I had some technical issues as well. So at the moment, I don't think my video is up. I may be on show and not realise it, but I can't see myself. So yes, thank you so much, Laura. That's really helpful, and we've had a number of questions come in. So I will pick some of these out. So we've got about 5 minutes left, and hopefully try and get through as many as we possibly can. So the first question, actually directed to you, Laura. Is there any way of knowing, because you've mentioned it, any way of knowing that factual accuracy review has been undertaken independently?
Yes, absolutely, and it's part of the reason why you should use CQC's own form, which is on their website, but you'll see at the very top of the form, it has a section for who's completed it from your end, and there's also a section, I actually can't now remember if it's at the top or at the bottom, but it's on the form that says who's looked at it says for CQC's internal use only, and it should set out who's reviewed them and who's signed them off. And if that isn't filled in, or it isn't done independently, then as I say, there's grounds for challenge. And also it's actually set out in this factual accuracy top tips. It reminds inspectors that if you don't sign off, or if the manager doesn't sign off the factual accuracy response, then a provider might have grounds for a rating review, but it should be obvious from the form.
Right, thank you. Gemma, are you able to answer this? If you are a provider with requires improvement with breaches, what do you think that they can expect from CQC in this next phase?
Well, I'd say it all comes down to the information that's out there in real time, really, with the continuing monitoring that's going on. So with requires improvements, I would say that the CQC would probably still deem you to be a risky service. So I would say it would be to inspect some kind of inspection, but probably not on site. I think what CQC are going to do is increase on-site activity slowly. It's not going to be a full-blown law where they're all coming out and inspecting, but it will be that they're probably going to definitely target the high-risk services immediately and then trickle down to those that are possibly requires improvement. I think it's just kind of, we're going to have to see how this develops over the next couple of months. But I wouldn't say at that level to expect a physical inspection initially. I think it would be in the form of monitoring, but remote monitoring.
Great, thank you, Gemma. So we also have a question here from a home care provider. My question is, are CQC going to be doing any face-to-face inspections? And if not, how will CQC check through care plans, documentation and rostering? Gemma, I think you covered this in terms of your presentation around this pilot that CQC are running, particularly with home care providers. Are you able to answer that question?
Yeah, so this has come from Kate Tironi, where she said that she sees home care services as a good opportunity to pilot remote monitoring. So whereby they would go to the head office and, you know, seek information there as opposed to, you know, going on visits, etc. But I think because they could go to the office physically, but instead receive information through email, etc. I think that's where they're then focusing their resources on, is getting the information remotely and receiving it in that way, going out. But there's not been much information about the pilot. I think given a pilot, they're testing it. They are going to be focusing on safe and well-led in those pilots of the 60 home care services. But really and truly, that's going to kind of show how well this remote monitoring will work in the future.
Thank you. Thanks, Gemma. Laura, question here. How do we deal with inconsistency in judgments of inspectors, particularly across different regions?
This is a really interesting question, and I won't lie to you, it's very difficult. It comes up a lot, particularly for providers, large providers that have multi-locations across different regions of the country. They find that what flies for one inspector doesn't necessarily or is raised as a concern in other services. What I would say is that you should raise it through your factual accuracy challenge. Now, CQC's own guidance does say in relation to factual accuracy challenges on their website that they wouldn't normally consider information that compares other services and compares other reports, because obviously each inspection turns on its own fact. However, particularly if you're in a situation where you've got a number of services and there's inconsistency across inspections, how are you as a provider supposed to improve, manage risk, prepare for inspections? So I think it is something you should legitimately raise in your factual accuracy comments, but if it is an increasing concern, then that would be the legitimate subject of a complaint to CQC as well. It is a difficult topic and it is something that comes up time and time again, and I think it's a difficult situation because when we move to the regulated activities format of regulation and the ratings characteristics, etc., ultimately they all are quite subjective. So there is inconsistency in approach. That said, and you must always remember, and as a lawyer, this is always at the forefront of our minds, CQC are a public body. They must act in a way that's reasonable and they must exercise their discretion in a way that's reasonable and proportionate. So actually at the higher end of the scale, there possibly is ground for legal challenge. However, you also have to think about the merits and the expense of that. But it isn't something that should just be put up with. It's certainly something that should be fed back to CQC.
Great, thank you. I'm conscious of time and we are just a little bit over, so I'll just take one more question. I think one for you, Gemma. and particularly with your experience having come from CQC, so you've seen the type of issues that are raised during factual accuracy comments. We have a question here that says, how can you challenge judgments from inspectors who lack clinical expertise or experience, which can affect an inspection outcome?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So I would say that it's a case of putting forward the evidence in relation to the clinical expertise of the staff at the home. So obviously, I would say there's nothing wrong in challenging CQC and challenging those that have done the actual inspection, because the experts, you know, their information and who has come to the inspection, you know, that information could be sought. It is often very difficult to get further evidence than the inspection report, which we have seen. Even just getting inspection notes is very difficult. But at the same time, that challenge could be put forward, because at the end of the day, providers are experts in their field as well. You have employed staff with clinical expertise to carry out that role, and it shouldn't be someone who doesn't have the expertise to come and critique that. So I think it would be about having your evidence, having evidence of the qualifications and experience of the staff that are undertaking the role, and challenge CQC, challenge the staff that have come and done the inspection if you have evidence of them not being up to scratch or having the relevant expertise to be able to make that critique or that judgment or decision. Yeah. I think it just comes down to the information that you can gather, because it is very difficult with getting the information from CQC as to how that inspection has gone in detail.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with all these issues that arise, it's about taking a methodical approach and actually going bit by bit and gathering your evidence as well. It's all very well what CQC have to say, but we have to demonstrate with reference to concrete documentation, listening to what people have said in the service, staff statements, etc. They all can feed into challenging CQC on any of these points where you feel that it's not reflective of your service. Great. Well, thank you very much, everybody. I think we'll have to start drawing that to the webinar to a conclusion. We do have a number of other webinars coming up. We have one coming up on safeguarding and the inquest process, which we'd all like you to join if you would like to. We also have a fourth webinar coming up in December, which we've deemed as provider choice. So we'd like to hear from you about what topics you would like us to talk about, and we will tailor it accordingly. So do have a look on our website, www.ridout-law.com, for more details. You can also find a number of useful articles and sector news on our website, and if you are interested in signing up to our e-newsletter, then full details can also be found on our website. So just like to thank everybody for joining. Say thank you for taking the time out of your day. We will be circulating the slides to all participants for anyone who hadn't joined at the beginning, as well as the recording. But in the meantime, thank you very much and look after yourselves. Goodbye.